Hi, MPC XL is here, and you can see where the XL comes from. It's the next generation large format MPC, replacing the previous generation MPC X and X Special Edition, and it's even bigger. Like on the MPC LIVE III, and here it is shown to scale. New on the hardware side are the MPCe expressive pads, the new touch strips, the new step buttons for step sequencing, and a few other functions. And internally is the new second generation, much faster processor, double the internal storage and RAM than LIVE III, where even LIVE III came with double or more memory compared to the old generation. And this has all the new software or firmware features as LIVE III, including the new stem separation, which is only available on this and on LIVE III, and additional new features like the Matrix and a few other plugins that require a paid firmware upgrade for the first generation MPCs. Also, compared to the old MPC X, it's got a new Q-link arrangement in a straight line compared to the 4x4 grid on the old MPC X. This change aligns the Q-links with the step sequencer and also makes a whole bunch of buttons more accessible compared to the previous generation. In this video, I'll take a look at it in detail, as well as important new features in firmware 3.7 that make the MPC pads even more usable, and pros and cons overall compared to the competition and previous MPCs. Before I start, a quick disclosure: Akai sent me the XL. Other than that, no money changed hands. They have no say over the content of this video and don't get to see it before it's published. Okay, before I dive into the details, just a quick bird's eye view. You can see where the MPC XL got its name. It's about 4 centimeters wider compared to the MPC X to accommodate for the new touch strip, and about 6 centimeters deeper to make way for the step buttons with the Q-links and their various modes. And it's almost a centimeter thicker on the back end to accommodate for the angled Q-link screens. The build feels just as sturdy and the screens are the same size, even though the screen on the MPC XL seems to have more contrast to me. Also, the buttons on the MPC XL are all backlit, and they're the soft clicky kind compared to the more rough clicky kind on the MPC X, except for these, which aren't clicky at all. Like on the MPC X, you can't press the data dial to make a selection. So say if I navigate over here, you can choose different items, but if you go into a menu and you want to enter it, then you can't press this. You need to press either this or enter, choose, and then again go to enter or this. On all the smaller MPCs, this is a push encoder. Also, unlike LIVE III, there's no built-in speaker here. This is a pad you can rest your hands on, and there's no built-in microphone. By the way, the screens on both tilt up with a kickstand in the back, which is how you'd normally use them. I just have it this way because it's easier to film. Okay, let's dive in and take a deeper look. First at the main stars of the show, the new MPCe pads. Like the previous generation, they're both velocity sensitive and pressure sensitive. But now they've got 2 more dimensions of expression, the X-axis and the Y-axis. This opens up quite a few options, for example, playing different sounds on different quadrants of a pad, or playing a different sound in the center compared to the edges, or even playing different articulations of a sound based on the quadrant, or pretty much any 2 parameters you want to point X and Y to. Now, as of firmware version 3.7, Akai has opened up access to use the XY location in 3 new places in the operating system, giving you a total of 5 different ways to explore MPCe. Let's take a quick look at the new ones first. So the first new feature in 3.7 is that you can simply assign samples to any quadrant you like. So say, for example, if I didn't want to trigger the snare on all parts of the pad, just say on the left side, I would do that and it would trigger here, and I could choose a different sample. Let's go for something totally different to trigger either everywhere or just on the right side. Now, you could do this previously, but you'd have to program it in the mod matrix. You'd need to go ahead and choose the pad and choose one of the MPC parameters, say pad X, point it to a target, which would be the layer crossfade parameter, and then choose a shaper. Anyway, it was a bit of a hassle. So now they totally simplified this quadrant business. Of course, I could choose to have something else trigger here. So you get the idea. By the way, you could do this not only for 4 samples, but for up to 8 samples at a time. Then the second new feature in 3.7, which really helps leverage both expression and drum kits in general, is a new feature called partial presets. Partial presets let you load and save the entire pad synthesis engine state, including setup parameters like filter, drum effects, mod matrix routings. So among other, this helps you save time with the mod matrix, but not just. So all of these presets that come with the new firmware aren't related at all to MPCe, just these ones. Let's say, for example, take a look at pitch. Now, I've intentionally prepared this long, boring sample so we can hear what the partial presets do to it. Drop long is basically a partial preset that shifts the pad parameters around so that there's a pitch mod. Or drop short, rise and fall. So this can change quite a few parameters across the drum kit synth for that pad. This basically does all the programming of note counters and the mod matrix, filters, and pad effects all for you. Even totally unrelated to the MPCe pads. So there are quite a few of these. And they come in, like I mentioned earlier, plenty of categories. For example, the note counter ones are fun. Let's try it on this one. As you can hear, every subsequent pad press cycles through a few sound design parameters based on the preset. So these have nothing to do with MPCe, and then if we go into the MPCe tab, we've got a few layer crossfade options. So previously we played one sample on one quadrant and a different sample on another. This, on the other hand, gives you a subtle crossfade between two sounds. Then we've got a bunch of filter XY pad options. Let's try, for example, the low pass filter partial preset. So this simply automatically programs the mod matrix for you. If we go into the mod matrix, you'll see it's pointing pad X to the cutoff of the filter, linear shaper, pad Y to resonance. So this is our cutoff, resonance. Anyway, partial presets are a major new improvement, I think, for what's possible with MPC. They've got a few more of these, for example, panning, vocal filter, Y to pitch. And yeah, it goes on and on. Aftertouch filter. And if you like, you can also create your own. Okay, and the third new way to use the MPCe Pads is the new MPCe Pads tab in the QLink edit screen. Now, just for those of you not familiar with the screen, it's not really a QLink screen, even though that's how you get to it, because QLinks is only one of the multiple things you can do on this screen. This should really be called the macros screen. Anyway, up until now, the only parameters you could control with pad expression were that pad's specific synth engine. Now, with this new tab, you can start to peek out of the pad to other track parameters, like, for example, effects parameters, or anything else going on in the mixer. And you can even branch out and explore things beyond the track in the project, which is an interesting choice. But yes, I've got, for example, here on track 2, an instance of fabric. So we could actually go in to the specific fabric parameters across the board. So each and every one of these pads can reach out anywhere across the project, and you can use the X-axis or the Y-axis or pressure and point it to multiple destinations across the project. Now, this is nice, but it's still just limited to drum tracks, at least as of the current firmware 3.7. So if I were to go to the next track, and there's a nice shortcut here, you'd see that the MPCe Pads functionality isn't really available, in this case for a plugin track type, but this applies to any of the other track types, except, of course, drum tracks. So hopefully in the future, Akai will open up MPCe Pad functionality directly on other track types besides drums. Anyway, so that's what's new as far as MPCe Pads. We still have the two old ways that were available on version 3.6, meaning the mod matrix, along with the ability to crossfade between samples in multiple ways. And we still also have the different articulations, which you access on the effects tab. So there are a whole bunch of presets here that you can choose from, as per firmware 3.6. Finally, for the MPCe Pads, in case you were wondering, they are exactly the same size as the pads on the MPC X. Moving on, the next new control element for MPC XL is the touch strip. It works exactly the same way as on Live 3, except that now it's got two buttons, a direct link to touch effects, and then the touch strip button for everything else. And with shift or with a double tap here, you can edit the parameters for touch effects, or in the case of this touch strip function. With Shift, you can edit this functionality here. You can tab between different touch strip options by repeatedly pressing this button, or just with a long press, you'll be able to select one of the options here. I already covered this in depth in my MPC LIVE III video, but just very briefly, besides applying one of a variety of touch effects, which you can configure here, the touch strip is pretty versatile. For example, you can use it to control the last cue link. So say I touch metronome level, and I now control metronome level from here. There are a few other usual suspects. The crossfader is a cool option. This lets you crossfade between tracks that you designate as either A or B in the mixer. So you select tracks to be either A or B and crossfade between them using the touch strip. And there's an interesting new note mode. So previously we had the regular note mode that would simply strum across a scale, and you can configure that scale or its octave and the scale itself from a number of scales. Now there's a new note strum option. So the idea here is that you first hold a chord and you can strum it. I think they need to work on sustain here and also extending it beyond just one octave. So I think there needs to be an option here to expand the range to more octaves. But regardless, you could go, say, into here, then choose a progression, and then strum your way through progressions. Okay, let's move on. The next new interface element are these step buttons. These were first introduced in MPC LIVE III, though they're much wider and more spread out here. They're called step buttons because many of the ways they can be used are related to sequencing, but they can be used for other things like track selection, arming tracks, muting tracks, moving between sequences, on-off macros, and a bit of visual fun. You choose the step button mode by either holding set and pressing one of these, or pressing it and then selecting the mode. Other than that, they work exactly like MPC LIVE III, but I'm not sending you to my LIVE III video because of the interesting way the cue links interact with the step buttons on MPC XL. Now, right now, my cue links are in screen mode. To get them to line up with the steps, you need to hold cue links and activate the new step sequencer option, in which case they'll do different things depending on the step mode. They're not active in all step modes, but in most they are. So for example, if I wanted to sequence a kick, I could do it this way, or just add kind of little soft notes by using the velocity parameter. Like LIVE III, you can also hold a step and edit its velocity this way, but you don't really need to. And like LIVE III, the timing of these steps is related to the timing correction timing. So if we change that, things will align differently. Other than that, they work just like in LIVE III. So if we had 2 pages here, I could go backwards and forwards using these buttons. Let's take a look at the grid. You could make longer notes by holding a note and tying it. And like LIVE III, you can also sequence quadrants. So I've got an articulation here on this hat. So say I could sequence a few steps without this articulation, and then choose the articulation and add a few ratchet or flam steps here. Let's get the sequence back down to 1. Like LIVE III, you can audition an entire step by holding the step and pressing the event buttons. So that's the drum sequencer. Then you've got a note sequencer, which works better for melodic tracks. Let's get out of chord mode. This works like on LIVE III. You choose the first note and then add notes onto the grid. Except as you see now, we've got the added bonus of changing the note's velocity. There are a whole bunch of things you can do here. Again, watch my LIVE III video for the full tutorial. The next step mode is step edit. Let's see what the cue links do here. So this lets you edit a set number of parameters on a per note basis. It's less useful for note tracks, but still we can choose velocity, ratchets, probability, and nudge notes. But if we go to our drum track, and of course, pick a pad that's sequenced, then you can see we've got these parameters for the events, but also a whole bunch of modifiers that are opened up here, which is pretty cool on a per note basis to have these direct controls, including coarse and fine tuning. The next step mode is note length mode, where as you can see, the cue links now control the different note lengths. I don't think they do anything for last step mode, but for automation mode, they do plenty. So in this mode, they'll automate whatever parameter we highlight here. So this can be anything that already exists in our track, or any new automation we want to add. So say if we wanted to sequence the air tube drive saturation, then we now have control of that. This, of course, appears on our grid. So if we open this up, you can see our automation here. Okay, let's move on. The next two modes are clip launching modes. And if we go to clip launch, then nothing comes up here. Doesn't do anything on clip launch. But if we go to row launch, then we get to control the tempo of rows if we chose to activate a per row tempo. So you can see I've enabled that here, and I can edit the tempo here. So that works anywhere that I am. Then in the next mode, in track select mode, where you can select the different tracks, the cue links work as a mixer. So that's really nice. You don't need to jump into the mixer to mix. You can do that right here and still be somewhere else. Same goes, by the way, for the track arm and track mute modes. So you just get a mixer, which is cool. Next, sequence is an interesting mode. I've only got one sequence here, but let's very quickly add another one. And let's maybe copy the sequence. I want to go from 1 to 2. Let's do it. And let's just name this as 2. Anyway, the cool thing here is that besides seeing the sequence names here and being able to go back and forth between the two sequences, you can use the cue links to set the active track you'll go to when you swap sequences. So for example, here I'm on vocal stack intro, but if I go to the sequence 1, you'll see I immediately hop to the mellotron track. Let's maybe go to something we can play here. Say go for pluck here. So I could play the mellotron here and the pluck here as part of a performance. By the way, this feature is available on other MPCs if you long press the sequence name. So those are the cue links on the various step edit modes. They don't do anything, by the way, on the visuals mode, which animates these, or on the edit actions mode. Let's move on and take a bit of a deeper look at the buttons on the two MPCs. We no longer have dedicated buttons for the various cue link modes, probably because there are so many of them. So we lost that. We also lost these buttons when they're used with the F key combo. So in this mode, you had 6 buttons to choose the 6 tabs on the bottom of the screen. We no longer have that. I don't think it's that big of a loss, but you tell me in the comments. Anyway, now that the cue links have been moved up here, a lot of the buttons have been moved here, which I call kind of like a pinky away. Whereas you had to sort of reach for them over here. And since moving them here cleared up this space, they of course added a few more buttons here. These buttons let you quickly move between tracks, outputs, returns, submixes, each of these groups. Maybe we can see that better over here. This works, by the way, for the mixer too, which is useful. Track plus minus is always useful, though don't forget the track select mode, which I like a lot. The track name screen moved here, and we now get track level. And quite a few features got their own button here. For example, stem separation, flatten, chop, convert. It's fun, but don't forget it's all the same operating system as Live 3 and almost the same operating system as the first generation MPCs, of course without the additional power, storage, and so on. Moving on, we also have a bunch more view meters on the panel. So the original MPC X only had one, which could either show you the current track output level or the main output. Now you've got a view meter for each. Besides that, there's an additional USB input view meter, and you can select which input pair you want to monitor here, and there are level meters for all 4 inputs. I think these controls, by the way, are the same. You can sample from the back or from the front. So that's pretty much it in terms of physical differences we can see, but there's a lot new under the hood. The internal processor is a new 8-core model like Live 3 compared to a 4-core model on the first generation MPCs. They also did something here on the back end. Stuff loads much faster than on the old MPC. The internal RAM for instruments has been upgraded to 16 gigs compared to 8 on Live 3, or 4 on the XSE, or 2 on the X, which means plenty of room for large plugins. Speaking of which, like on Live 3, you can now host 32 plugin tracks compared to only 8 in the previous generation, and 16 audio tracks compared to just 8 on the first generation. The internal built-in storage has also been significantly increased, so we now have 194 gigs free out of, it's actually more than 198 because you're seeing the user drive space. Total memory inside is 256 gigs. There's about 40 gigs of factory content, both expansions and instruments. You can still expand this with an internal SATA drive plugged in the bottom, or over USB or an SD card, but with almost 200 gigs free, you don't need to rush to buy an internal drive like you did on the old models. In terms of I/O, things may seem the same when you look at the back, but there are a few significant differences. I'll start with what's the same. Both large format MPCs have 4 independent input channels with various connector options in the front and the back. So both have 2 phantom powered combo jacks in the back, 2 RCA phono inputs, and 2 instrument inputs in the front. Besides regular line inputs in the back, both MPCs also have 8 output channels in the back and 2 headphone jacks in the front. Both have 6 MIDI DIN ports, 4 out and 2 in. Both have 8 CV gate outputs, but now on MPC XL you can use them as 16 outputs with a TRS splitter cable. Both have 2 USB Type A jacks on the back and an SD card up front. But MPC XL also has 1 more USB Type A jack in the front. And where things get even more interesting is that MPC XL now has a USB-C port in the back instead of USB Type B. And the difference isn't just semantics. This port does quite a few things that the first generation MPCs can't. Like on MPC LIVE III, you can use the USB-C port to send back and forth 24 audio channels, as well as 4 virtual MIDI ports. And you can do all this in standalone mode, something you couldn't do in the previous generation. You can also connect this via USB-C to sample directly from your phone. So that's a huge improvement for MPC XL. Now, like MPC X, it also works as an 8-in, 4-out audio interface in controller mode. And also like MPC X, the XL has Wi-Fi for firmware updates, content downloads, and Ableton Link, but at least not yet, not for transferring files, and it has Bluetooth for MIDI, but not for audio. Then another difference on the firmware side, like I mentioned earlier, MPC XL comes with the propack, which includes the clip launcher, the Pro Reverb plugin, Super Time Stretch, as well as other features I'll show on screen. These weren't originally included on the MPC X and Special Edition, but you can upgrade it by buying the propack. And like I mentioned, the advanced stem separation isn't available at all on the original MPC X or any other first generation MPCs. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons for MPC XL overall. First, on the pros side, with the arranger, the clip launcher, all its other features, the second generation of MPCs has become the most capable standalone DAW-in-a-box platform. And if you want that with as many hands-on controls as possible, MPC XL is the one to beat. Then now with the MPCe Pads, you get expressive options you just can't get with a mouse or even a regular 4x4 grid, especially in light of all the presets and shortcuts added in firmware 3.7. Now you could rightfully argue that there are still advantages to using an actual DAW on a computer, for example, a bigger screen, the ability to run third-party plugins, and the option to use a mouse for quickly moving items around a timeline. And if that's important to you, you can always bounce back and forth between using the MPC in standalone mode and in controller mode, where you get the exact same interface, but if you want to use a mouse every now and then or load third-party plugins, you can do that on your computer. The main advantage the MPC workflow has over using a DAW, even with a controller, is that every function in the MPC operating system is planned in advance to be accessible using the hardware, either through plenty of dedicated buttons in this case, or through using the touchscreen. In contrast, when you pair a DAW with a controller, often many features are left inaccessible by the controller, even in the case of MPC's nearest competitor, Push 3. So all those great things are the pros, but with that said, there are a few things to consider. First, price. Ultimately, while MPC XL has more direct controls than any other MPC, the less expensive MPC LIVE III can run pretty much the same projects unless you really use a lot of RAM, has the same processor power, MPCe Pads, touch strip, similar step buttons, though only with 4 Q-links compared to 16, and no Q-link screens, which I think is an important pro. LIVE III also doesn't have the same connectivity, though you can expand it with an audio interface. And then back to competitors as far as price goes, the old MPCs, while less powerful and without the dedicated controls, still run the same core operating system and have the same workflow, especially if you upgrade them with a propack, minus the advanced stem separation. The old generation doesn't suddenly become unusable just because the new generation came out. On the contrary, it becomes cheaper on the second-hand market. Another potential con for you is the size. You're going to need to make room for this. Yes, it's a good studio hub, but it's almost as big as some studios. And the last hardware con here that may seem trivial but isn't to me is that you can't click the data dial. You can use it to move between items in a menu, but if you need to select something, you'll need to do that either using the Enter key or this button. Pressing this is a function I use a lot on the other MPCs. Beats me why Akai left it out. Then something that didn't bother me but may bother you is the fact that the cue links are no longer arranged in a 4x4 grid. This works way better when working with the step buttons, but if you're editing pad parameters, this arrangement is more intuitive. Personally, I prefer this and I love the tilted screens, but the screens are the same size as the old MPC, however, they're further away. It becomes so that if I need to read this small font, it's a bit hard. I think they can fix this though. Right now, you can see the parameter name and its value. If they just show the name or the value using a bigger font, that would make these much more legible. Finally, on the wishlist side, while the MPCe Pads support on drum tracks is excellent, and you can reach out to other track types in the new MPCe Pads mode, there's no real support for MPCe on any other track type. So that definitely needs to be added, both to plugins and any other of the available instrument tracks. So that's it for MPC XL. I've got plenty of multi-sampled instruments for it, or any other MPC or sampler on my Patreon, where you'll also find my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.